Liberty in our lifetimes in a free state of our own. That's the vision. That's the dream. And we are building it in New Hampshire. I'm Eric Brakey, your host and renegade statesman for the Porcupine Report. Welcome to your source for porcupine news and free-range conversation on matters of liberty. All right, let's hop into the show. Hey, you Porcupine, you. Welcome to episode 41 of the Porcupine Report. I am, as always, your host, your renegade statesman, your executive director of the Free State Project, Eric Brakey. And boy, do I believe. What did we just see this last night? Well, we're going to be talking about that today. What a sweep. First of all, I want to share some news with you before getting to our guest. We're going to be talking about what just happened. And our guest will be Jack Hunter. I'll tell you about him in a moment. He's a returning guest to the show. Great, a friend of mine for a long time, a great political thinker, and looking forward to our conversation. But first, some news. First of all, some personal news. I will tell you that as of yesterday, I completed my move to New Hampshire. I am now officially a citizen of New Hampshire, registered to vote. I cast my first ballot. In fact, I resigned my Senate seat yesterday right before I did it. I wanted to make sure I was doing everything legally by the books and all of that. I declared my change of residence, resigned my seat in the Maine Senate. My replacement was being elected yesterday, so that all works out. And thankfully, the Republican got elected, Bruce Bickford. Congratulations to him. I was a little worried about leaving a vacuum as I exited Maine politics. I'm glad that the candidate I supported won there. And but of course, that's me. I'm sure you don't care about that. What you care is about the news of what's happening in New Hampshire and around the country. Well, of course, we've all been hearing a lot about what's happened on the national level. Everyone's talking about it. Donald Trump winning the White House, Republicans taking the U.S. Senate and the U.S. House of Representatives. But I've got some even better news for those of us who care about a free New Hampshire. And that better news is, while on first appearance, people might look at New Hampshire and say, "Oh, it went blue in the federal races." That's sadly a common thing in New Hampshire. The federal races tend to go blue. I think there's like a core kind of swing group that tends to vote blue for the federal races and Republican for the more local races. You know, change happens from the bottom up, and it happens gradually for it to be sustaining. But change is happening from the bottom up in New Hampshire. Here's the good news. Out of 400 members of the New Hampshire House of Representatives, which is the most libertarian political body in the world, right here in New Hampshire, 400 members. The last 2 years, Republicans were just barely squeaking by with a majority. And we don't care about Republicans generally, but we do care when that caucus is composed of a huge component of Liberty Republicans. And there have been about 100 Liberty Republicans in the New Hampshire GOP caucus in the House of Representatives this past year as they pushed for things like defend the guard and cutting taxes and school choice. But it was very slim margin. It was a big concern that Democrats might take back the House of Representatives, and that would be a huge setback for the cause of freedom in New Hampshire. And if you believe, like I do, that New Hampshire is important to the cause of freedom in the world, it would be a setback in the Liberty homeland. Huge implications. Well, the opposite happened. We now know that the Republican majority in the House of Representatives in New Hampshire has expanded to at least 222. So they picked up about 20 more seats. That's a 10% increase in the Republican caucus. And also, I'm told, many of those flips were Liberty Republicans winning seats that weren't expected to be won. And so Liberty Republicans have expanded the threshold, their presence in the caucus now too. So boil it down to means House Republicans with a strong Liberty coalition that's driving the agenda there has expanded its majority from like a 4-seat majority to a 40-seat majority. Boy, it is great news. And that's not all, because in the New Hampshire Senate, the New Hampshire Senate has been, even though it's been Republican controlled, there's been a real logjam there with the Republican establishment, who have been blocking votes from even taking place on many liberty bills, like Defend the Guard. While Defend the Guard passed the New Hampshire House of Representatives this past year, they couldn't even get a roll call vote in the Senate, because it takes at least 2 state senators to ask for a roll call vote. And we only had one. There was only one Liberty senator in the New Hampshire Senate. Well, now I'm told by the folks, our friends at the New Hampshire Liberty Alliance, that there are 5 Liberty senators in the New Hampshire Senate. This is a great turning of the page. It means that we are going to be able to get roll call votes on our Liberty bills, including Defend the Guard, in the new year. And on top of that, Kelly Ayotte, the Republican candidate for governor, has won the governorship against her opponent, Joyce Craig. Joyce Craig was the former mayor of Manchester, and get this, Kelly Ayotte beat her in Manchester. Talk about losing your own city. Now, look, I'm not going to pretend to be a huge fan of Kelly Ayotte. I do think that she is ultimately a neoconservative, and her record in Congress leaves a lot to be desired. And I don't expect her to be an ally on things like Defend the Guard. But what I perceive as happening is she's going to perhaps slow us down from advancing liberty as fast as we might like in New Hampshire, but she's not going to be pulling us backwards like we would have experienced with a Joyce Craig governorship. So this is good news overall. And I am predicting that the table is set now, that right to work is going to pass in the state of New Hampshire. This would be the first state in New England to pass right to work. Kelly Ayotte is on record supporting it. This was a big push, and this would restore accountability in unions, so that union bosses have to be accountable to their members, because if their members don't feel like their money is being well spent, they don't have to pay union dues. It makes union dues voluntary. I expect New Hampshire is about to be the first state in New England with a right to work law. And I also expect that we're going to see expansions in school choice and so many other great liberty, freedom policies. So good things coming in New Hampshire. Of course, it wasn't not everything. We didn't win everything. We are saddened that Lily Tang Williams, who was a real firebrand and really proved herself a hero of the liberty movement and the Free State movement, was running for Congress in the 2nd District of New Hampshire. She fell short in that race, but she has really made her mark. She made the whole country was watching as she roasted her Democratic primary opponent, whose husband is the national security advisor for Joe Biden. She roasted her, and it was shared by Bobby Kennedy and Joe Rogan. And anyway, Lily Tang Williams is a hero, and we look forward to seeing what she does next. So that's the news out of New Hampshire. Good news overall. Always room for improvement. It is a project, but boy, it just keeps getting better and better. And the growth of the liberty movement in New Hampshire really goes to show that we are the free state. We are building something that will last, a liberty homeland for all those who yearn to breathe free. So that's the rundown from New Hampshire. Now, I want to welcome onto the show our guest for this week. If you are a regular watcher of the show, this is his 2nd or 3rd time on the program. He's been on before. He's a good friend of mine. His name is Jack Hunter. Now, Jack, if you don't know him, has been around in doing commentary on libertarian conservative politics for longer than I've been involved in the movement, because in fact, Jack Hunter was one of the individuals who played a big role with his commentary in convincing me why I should no longer be a neoconservative and why I joined the Ron Paul revolution back in 2010. In the years since, Jack has co-authored and many books with individuals, including Senator Rand Paul's The Tea Party Goes to Washington. He currently works with Brad Palumbo and Hannah Cox on their outfit together called Based Politics. And we're going to be talking today about what just happened. So let's welcome to the show, Jack Hunter.
Hey, good to be with you, Eric.
Hey, it's great to see you again, as always, Jack. So let me ask you, what just happened?
People were tired and fed up with elites and their propaganda and their narratives, and they completely rejected it. Now, that's a broad answer to a simple question, but yeah, that's what happened.
it's amazing to see. I feel like watching, particularly on the federal level. I mean, in some ways, it was a gambit that was heavily criticized by some wings of the libertarian movement. And I want to be clear here. The Free State movement is a broad tent with all kinds of libertarians, and I only speak for myself here. But watching what Angela McArdle did as chair of the Libertarian Party, she took a gamble, she took a risk in terms of forming a coalition between libertarians and the America First movement, with Donald Trump as the figure leading the charge, and extracted promises to pardon Ross Ulbricht, put a libertarian in the cabinet, put libertarians in key positions to recommend more pardons for political prisoners. Also, he made some other promises I'm hopeful on, but a little skeptical he'll follow through on, like abolishing the Department of Education. We'll see what happens there. One can dream. But it looks like at least this libertarian America First coalition has been part of a winning combination. And what's so great is that it doesn't involve the neoconservatives at the table, who have been displaced, apparently, and are now much more comfortable in the losing Democratic Party than in this new winning Republican coalition. Is that a correct analysis, or what do you have to say to that?
Yes,
Jack?
it's the opposition to the neoconservatives. So on this day when we're recording this, where Donald Trump has become president-elect and defeated Kamala Harris, people get mad if you mispronounce it apparently, who was endorsed by Dick Cheney and Liz Cheney, a lot of Democrats, but also neoconservatives who share the same party, I guess, at this point, are feeling very upset and down today. I want you to kick the crap out of them while they're down. And then when your foot gets tired, kick them more. Invite your libertarian friends to kick the head. I don't mean actually. I mean, these people had no tolerance for Ron Paul, libertarians, and our movement. They kicked us when we were down over and over. They lied about that man, called him all sorts of things, and we were somewhat defenseless in that they had all the institutional power and we didn't.
Yeah.
But when they're down, remember that. Always remember that. There's not a lot of things in this world I hate. I try to be gracious. But neocons, yeah. As far as what the Libertarian Party is doing, this is the most interesting that the Libertarian Party has been in my lifetime. I voted for Gary Johnson twice. I voted for Joe Jorgensen. I voted for Donald Trump this time for many reasons, including Angela McArdle having the great idea of the LP using what little leverage it has. We're small. I'm registered independent, so I'm not part of the party or anything. But using that leverage to gain libertarian things. I've always thought the LP should do that. I think the Green Party with Jill Stein and the little bit of vote they got should have said, all right, Harris Waltz, if y'all are going to look at Gaza, maybe do something about that. Maybe we'll vote for you. That's not what happened, but maybe in the future, something like that.
Yeah.
He did that this time. And commuting the sentence of Ross Ulbricht would be a major win. If that alone happens, forget about abolishing the Department of Education, libertarian in the cabinet, some foreign policy stuff we'd like to see. If that one thing, the Free Ross slogan, comes to fruition and the LP had a hand in that, it will be the greatest accomplishment in the history of the Libertarian Party.
And I will say, all Donald Trump did was listen, right? He listened and he promised to people that he wanted in his coalition the things that they were asking for. I mean, I will tell you, I had the opportunity when Joe Biden came to my district in Maine, to Auburn, Maine, and I got to meet him, and I gave him a personal note asking him to consider a pardon for Ross Ulbricht, and I never heard back from him. He didn't listen. He didn't care. This could have been an easy layup for them, right? Instead, they left an issue on the table. All he had to do was sign a piece of paper and pardon this, Ross Ulbricht, who has been unjustly in prison, sentenced to double lifetime sentence for basically just building a website, a marketplace online, and they didn't. He didn't listen. They didn't care. There's hubris to think that they. Anyway, if if Joe Biden had just pardoned Ross Ulbricht, maybe there wouldn't have been such a tangible, clear-cut issue that would have led to libertarians joining with the Trump coalition.
They don't think that way. Donald Trump knows that there's voters out there, and he wants to hear what they have to say. The Democratic coalition serve elites. You're not part of that. I'm not part of that. That's who they serve.
Yeah.
That's all they care about. Ross Ulbricht and that issue isn't even on their radar. Donald Trump, even more than that, look, I don't think he ever heard of Ross Ulbricht until you or Angela, whoever brought it up first. But Tucker Carlson has, RFK Jr. has, Tulsi Gabbard has, Vivek Ramaswamy has, and they probably, I don't mean to speak for all these people, but like, if that's who's in, and Rand Paul, certainly, who even prior to this election, that was something they talked about. That issue is going to remain, if you see what I'm saying. So you're correct. Biden wouldn't care you talking to him, but not even people around him. They wouldn't even, that's not something they care about.
Yeah. What, you bring up some of these folks, of course, it is interesting to observe this team of, this rebel alliance that formed around the Trump campaign. Former rivals who ultimately joined his campaign effort, including Bobby Kennedy, Tulsi Gabbard, Vivek Ramaswamy, and of course Elon Musk was not necessarily a rival. I mean, I guess he was supporting DeSantis at one point.
Right. He used to be a Democrat. I mean, all the people you just mentioned are former Democrats.
Yeah. I don't know if Vivek is
not Vivek, but RFK and Tulsi, certainly.
Yeah. And I will note, of course, that from a Free State Project perspective, all of these are individuals, except for Elon Musk. We got to get him to one of our events one of these days. But all of these are individuals who could be found speaking with libertarians at the Porcupine Freedom Festival in New Hampshire or the New Hampshire Liberty Forum. New Hampshire's really become a great hub for, if you want to meet the libertarians, this is the concentration of the biggest concentration of the doers and builders to come out and meet us. But what do you make of this rebel alliance that has apparently formed a pretty broad coalition that put Trump over the edge in a landslide?
I find it extremely exciting. Look, there's no campaign that's probably going to beat for the rest of my life what we did in 2008 and 2012 in the Republican primaries with Ron Paul. That was just a special place and time for the perfect candidate with all the right ideas. But in lieu of that, I think that the Trump phenomenon beginning in 2016, and let me be perfectly clear, I did not vote for Donald Trump in 2016. I voted for Gary Johnson. I did not vote for him in 2020. I voted for George Jorgensen. But what happened, especially with the anti-war sentiment, and I'm not, when I say this to libertarians, they're like, oh, he did this, he did. Of course he did. He's not a thorough non-interventionist. Neither was Dwight Eisenhower, but his military-industrial complex speech meant something. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So Trump has done what he's done, but the general shift in the Republican Party due to Trump and his America First ideology has been to let's not get involved in these foreign wars. He didn't start any when he was president, which was the first, 2 decades for any president. But that bent in the Republican Party of being anti-war is something that Ron Paul was a precursor for, that his son, Senator Rand Paul, has been a force for. I could go all the way to back. I got my toes wet with Pat Buchanan when I was 19. He was no libertarian, but was an anti-war conservative. And, the Pauls were on board with Buchanan at the time for that reason. So this has existed within the Republican Party on the right for a while, but it's seen as crescendo with Donald Trump. And it is the reason that Dick Cheney and Liz Cheney and every prominent neocon, with the exception of Nikki Haley, got behind Kamala Harris. Neocons always want the candidate that will bring more war. Yeah. And they wanted to defeat any candidate who's going to prevent war. So despite Donald Trump's imperfect record, there's a reason. There's not a reason, as much as you like for people who don't like what I'm saying, that those prominent neocons, the former Vice President Dick Cheney and his politician daughter Liz Cheney, endorsed Kamala Harris. This is a sea change in the parties. I noticed in this election, you had Democrats who had built up in their brains that Trump's Hitler and all this other crazy stuff they hear on MSNBC, and they say to each other for 10 years without hearing any kind of outside opinion. They watch The View, listen to Stephen Colbert, and they were just singularly focused on Trump's Hitler. We got to stop him. The world's going to end if we don't.
It was bizarre that was like their closing argument. Right?
Yes, it's unhealthy. And then I saw a different kind of progressive Certainly some older ones. And, you know, a lot of these people are considered right wing now, Glenn Greenwald, Matt Taibbi, who have changed none of their beliefs, but because they didn't decide to become this weird social club that the Democratic Party has become, they're now right wing. But I saw some younger friends of mine who might have been like for Bernie at one time, were very upset about what's going on in Gaza and the death and destruction going on there, who were like, I'm not supporting this Kamala Harris woman if she's hanging out with Liz Cheney. Like they knew that much, and they probably voted for Jill Stein, and some of them even said so. But that coalition has a lot more similarities with Trump. I mean, Trump beat Harris's butt with Arab American voters in places like Dearborn, Michigan last night. Why? Because he went out and reached out to them and talked to them and said, I'll stop the killing. But you see what I'm saying? So like a far left greenie Jill Stein voter who cares about that issue has far more in common with what's going on with Trump and RFK and Tulsi than the conventional Democratic Party of Kamala Harris right now. So I think it's an exciting realignment that defies conventional right and left, and some things that used to be right are now left and vice versa. And we can talk about that. But I think it's very exciting. I'm not a Trumpster. I think he's narcissistic. I think he can't get out of his own way. I think he has many flaws, as we all do. But I think as a vehicle, we can do some really good things, and not just on foreign policy. The two primary reasons I decided to vote for him, and it was months ago, was what's going on in Gaza. And when Trump was asked about it, when Biden was asked about it, he basically said, I'll stand with Israel and anything they want to do. Well, that's a complicated question with many moral problems. But when Trump was asked, and I think it was ABC News, he goes, we just have to stop the killing. I'll stop the killing. None of this was happening. And I'm like, that's a normal human answer. I don't care what you think about the guy. I do have one more reason. Trump has said anti-free speech things. He said, if you burn the flag, I'm going to put you in jail for a year. That is not constitutional. That's anti-First Amendment, anti-free speech. He's wanted to deport pro-Palestinian protesters. That's not constitutional. It's anti-free speech. It's anti-First Amendment. If he were to do any of those things, which I don't think he's going to do, there would be such massive resistance. The court would get into it. It wouldn't happen. And my main point is there would be a massive pushback against that. Right now, the Democratic Party institutionally is against free speech. Whether it's Tim Walz saying that misinformation, which they define, or hate speech, which they define, is not protected by the First Amendment. Kamala Harris saying she's going to sic the Department of Justice as president. Thank God she's not going to be president on social media platforms that allow misinformation and hate speech. Hillary Clinton saying that we should criminally prosecute and imprison people who share misinformation. And if you ask the average Democratic voter, I'm talking about friends of mine, people who I know and love who are loyal Democrats, and I say, are you for free speech and the First Amendment? And they all, to a man, will say, absolutely. I'm an American. I believe in free speech. And then I say, what about permitting misinformation and hate speech? They say, oh, we can't do that. We got to regulate that. That's where that party is institutionally. They tried to have a disinformation governance board, a federal agency under President Biden that would regulate our speech. That's where they are. So if they had won, and thankfully she didn't, they were in control of Congress and the presidency, and they tried to push through some of these things, there's nobody on their side going, wait, we have a First Amendment. In fact, many of their intellectuals now write articles in journals saying the First Amendment's a problem. The Constitution's a problem. That's different than Donald Trump's stupid anti-free speech comments. That is an institutional stance against the First Amendment and basic American liberty as Americans have always understood it for our entire history. So those are the two reasons, the foreign policy stuff and the free speech and basic liberalism, protecting that, the reasons I voted for Trump and his coalition that he has.
Let me ask you, understanding that Trump is, while many libertarians, myself included, yourself included, did make the decision to cast their ballots for Trump in this election, I also recognize his imperfections, his flaws, the times he's made promises that he hasn't followed through on. I remember 8 years ago when he talked about auditing the Fed, and then we never heard about that after he got elected again. What do you think that libertarians should be doing going forward to not just fall into the trap of, hey, he's our guy, we're going to support him no matter what happens, versus holding him to the promises that he made and working to make sure he does follow through on them. Any advice you'd give there?
You remind him of the promises that he made, and what I was alluding to earlier, having the people around him that he has, RFK, Tulsi. I hope these people are going to be in his administration in some capacity. But people like that, they understand what we're saying. They understand those concerns. If we're going back to Ross Ulbricht, he's got people right there in his ear that we can access. We have access to these people. It's not hard. Maybe not Trump, but them. And reminding him, you promised this. And I think he's at a place now. So like the maddest I ever was at Donald Trump was the end of his first term when he did not pardon Snowden and Julian Assange and all that. And what I heard is that Mitch McConnell got on him and said, if you do any of this stuff, we're going to impeach you again or whatever. And I was thinking, like, who the hell cares at this point? They've done it so many times. And you're a big wussy because the deep state's been after you for 4 years, and this is a deep state thing to do, and you're backing down. What a win. Yeah. I was angry. Yeah. I think in a second term, he's going to remember stuff like that. He's going to have all the people I just mentioned around him being like, yeah, the deep state's real. Remember what they did to you? And he'd be more likely to follow through on these promises. I'm not saying he is, and if he doesn't, we need to raise hell. That's the whole point. It's not to worship this man. I don't care about that. I think that's stupid. It's to get things done, whether that's policy or just basic principles.
What do you think the neocons attempt next? I know that there are still, a few prominent neoconservatives who have not totally left the GOP. Obviously, Nikki Haley is still waiting in the wings. Even more concerning is Mike Pompeo, who Trump continues to talk very highly of. And I even have heard I heard from a good source when I was at the Republican National Convention this year that Mike Pompeo is on the short list for Secretary of Defense. And of course, this is the guy who put together a plan to assassinate Julian Assange and is one of the worst neoconservatives up there with John Bolton and John McCain and Liz Cheney and all of that. And yet because he apparently plays the personality politics game better with Trump, who we all recognize has a bit of an ego, and he tends to like people who like him. I worry. I worry about some of these neocons who are still in his orbit and what we might see there. But I also know I see people like Elon Musk saying on Twitter that Donald Trump should not put any neocons like Pompeo in positions of power. So I guess what are the neocons that are still within the GOP, like those two, attempt to do, and what do the Cheneys of the world, the Bill Kristols of the world, the folks who have fled for the Democratic Party and lost bigly this week, what do you expect from them?
Neocons are going to do, whether they're in the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, what they've always done, and something I've always admired. They look at the politics on the ground as they are. They try to manipulate them towards their ends and use what exists to get what they want. A little bit of brief history here. Dan Quayle, George H.W. Bush's vice president, was basically handpicked by Bill Kristol.
Yeah.
Sarah Palin, who was the running mate for John McCain. John McCain's a thorough neocon, no problem there. All the Republicans like Bush Cheney at the time. How can we get this Tea Party thing involved with our neocon project? Well, he picked Sarah Palin, who was no neocon, but they immediately sent Randy Schuneman, who was a neocon operative, to be her foreign policy advisor. So you see what I'm saying. They're weaving what's happening. It was the Tea Party at the time with their neocon agenda. So here we are with Trump. Pompeo's a neocon. He's going to try to make Trump do neocon things as he did the first time. The difference is, I think Trump understands what that is a little bit more. He has more people around him than ever who know that that's bad, know what that is, can identify it, and not do it. The funniest thing to me is the neocons who are now stuck in the Democratic Party, because they are. And it is the more neoconservative party, and they were correct to pick that. They're all pro-choice now, and Obamacare is great. And they don't care about any other issue except getting their wars. So Liz and Dick Cheney are in a Democratic Party where they might get some of that neocon stuff if they can win in the future, but also a big part of the base is mad about the Gaza stuff and the opposite of Dick and Liz Cheney. That's where they're stuck. And I'm going to laugh at them the whole time and stick them in the ribs with a pin or something. I don't know, because I think it's great. But to answer your question, that's what neoconservatives do. That's what, if John Bolton was still around, that's what he'd be trying to do. But Trump finally saw the light on how dangerous that man is. That's what they're going to do. I just think they'll do it. It'll be to less effect this time. If Trump does 20 or 30% of the things that we hope he'll do, that'll be pretty good. Hopefully, it's more than that.
Yeah, I know. You know, I guess I've kind of imagined this whole time, if Trump did win, that we would likely still see a few neocons in his cabinet. But of course, that is a downgrade from the role that the neocons have typically had, which is my entire life, right? You talk about all the way back to Dan Quayle. There's always been a neoconservative on the Republican ticket in the presidential slot or the VP slot. This is the first time there was not.
Yes, and they still have the institutional power they've always had. They just don't have the electoral or popular power right now that they've enjoyed in the past. Yeah. Bush, Cheney, 2003, 2004 was like the high point of them riding high.
Yeah.
And they just always want to get back there.
And not to compare Donald Trump to George Washington, because there are major differences between the two. But I often think about that administration of George Washington, where George Washington was not like a particularly ideological president.
Mm-hmm.
He was really relying a lot on the people around him to help make kind of these policy decisions. And he had Alexander Hamilton in one ear and Thomas Jefferson in the other, and they were like playing this tug of war for George Washington and control of his administration. So I imagine somewhat that kind of court politics playing out again, this go around, except you will have more, if he follows through on his promise, at least one real libertarian in his cabinet.
That's what he promised, but we'll see.
We'll see. We've got to hold him to that promise. And of course, several other individuals who are liberty sympathetic, who may be in his cabinet, like Elon Musk and Bobby Kennedy and Tulsi and Vivek. I'd love to see them in different positions and kind of be voices of sanity, particularly on foreign policy issues as they come up. And of course, it's amazing to see that Elon Musk is talking about cutting $2 trillion from the federal budget.
Yeah.
And he even wants to consult with Ron Paul on that with his Department of Government Efficiency. What did you make when you saw that?
I think that's wonderful. Did you happen to hear Elon Musk's interview on Joe Rogan yesterday or the day before? It's long.
I did.
So this idea of a government efficiency department where you just start cutting the hell out of useless parts of government, and there's a lot of it, you have to identify it. He had this idea. I thought this is genius. So if there's departments where somebody's just not doing really anything and they've been paid for 25 years or whatever the deal is, but it's government we should cut. He had the idea of giving them severance pay for 2 or 3 years after it's cut, because as the point Joe Rogan made is, a lot of these are just bureaucrats who have no value in the market, and it's partly their fault, I guess, but partly just the situation. Look, I don't blame anybody for taking a job and making money for their family. I don't care what it is. If you get to be a bump on a log and do nothing, good for you, right? So that's what a lot of these government departments are. And his idea was, well, we wouldn't just throw them out. We would actually pay them for 2 or 3 years. And in those 2 or 3 years, they need to find some value on the market and do something. Yeah. We're not going to keep this job.
Learn to code.
Right. But I thought that was a way that people who just think that's a horrible idea could kind of be like, that's pretty fair, But that's what Elon Musk is thinking. So if he was in charge of something like that, look, Javier Milei, the Argentinian president, just got rid of their version of the IRS. So, and Trump likes that dude. He likes Trump, but like if we go in that direction with these government departments and useless jobs and just waste and bureaucracy, with Elon Musk at the head, I want to see him do with the United States federal government what he did at X, what he did at Twitter, where he just got rid of so many employees who weren't doing anything. So I'm all about that.
Well, let me ask you. You brought up the situation in Israel, and I suppose I have a little less confidence that Trump is going to resolve that situation. But I mean, I don't know. He couldn't do any worse than what the Biden administration has done. I do worry a little bit about how much money he's been taking from Sheldon Adelson's widow.
Sure.
And the promises he's likely been making as Israel, let me be clear, because I know we have many Jewish friends within the Free State community, and specifically, I'm criticizing the government, the state, and not the people who are lovely people. But it's very concerning what the state has been doing to the people of Palestine for the last year, and I didn't. I guess to some degree, I just kind of wrote it off of all of the choices don't seem to be very good on this, but at least Donald Trump seems to be remarkably better on Ukraine, and that's where we might get a nuclear war that could end the world.
Yeah. Well, so a few things. When I mentioned that Trump is more anti-war, and I usually say that because he's not perfect on that. There are things he did that we wouldn't like from a foreign policy perspective. Our libertarian friends is just twisted up in their mind about Trump will be like, well, he threatened Iran. I'm like, yeah, he did. He threatened a lot of people.
Yeah, and he threatened North Korea too, and then went
and then he shook his hand.
and then went over. You know, it was just tough diplomacy.
Right. Like, I want a guy that's going to yell at these countries, but in the end is going to shake their hand. And his book, The Art of the Deal, that's what he's all about. So look in this election, Kamala Harris, I think she had to be aware of some of these pro-Palestinian protesters, many of whom were genuine anti-Semites, but that was part of the left, what was going on, right? Mm. And nobody should bow down to these anti-Semitic people, but there is a legitimate criticism of what's going on in Gaza as it relates to the Israeli Defense Forces. So what Trump did, and this is kind of where I'm at too, and I think it's right, I support Israel. I like Israel. I want them to be our ally. That doesn't mean I unconditionally support everything their government does and I'm going to give them my tax dollars and have no questions about it. I've often said that Ronald Reagan's diaries would read as anti-Semitic to some people today just because he'd be like, well, Israel's our ally, but here's some problems I have. Here's some criticisms I have of their government. Yeah. We're conservatives, right? Or libertarians. What the hell are we talking about here? But the idea that that's anti-Semitic, like, no, I'm not giving you that. And then so Trump would be, I can support Israel, his Madison Square Garden rally. I mean, so many of the speakers were Jewish. There were Israeli flags. It's pro-Israel. And then he went to the Arab American community in Michigan, who are worried about what's going on, the death and destruction in Gaza. Some of these people are their relatives. And he talked to them and said he's going to do something about that too. And I think that's good. And on Ukraine, they're not going to win that war. They wanted to make a deal. Zelensky and Putin were going to make a deal early until the United States intervened and said, no deal. War, let's get this war on, basically, without saying it that way. And now after all this death and destruction and conscripts of 40-plus-year-old men who don't want to fight in the first place in Ukraine, and the Democratic Party and Kamala Harris and Joe Biden and, oh, you got to get victory and blah. It's like, well, you're not over there fighting, dude. This needs to reach a diplomatic peace. And that's what Trump said he'll do. He said, we're going to stop spending the money. I'm going to talk to Putin. I'm going to talk to Zelensky, and it's going to end. And we know if we weren't sending money, Zelensky wouldn't be down with this war. If that spigot's cut off, the war ends.
Well, this will be particularly interesting to watch in the here and now, because I know, like, for Ross Ulbricht, he said he would pardon him on day one, but he has to be sworn into the presidency to do that.
He's going to do like 50 things on day one. So
but for Ukraine, he suggested that once he wins, and we all know that he's going to be president, that he felt that he could help broker things immediately. I
think he could start it next week if he wanted to. I know some people say that's illegal, but good God, all the things our government does, it's already illegal. I'm not going to get mad at diplomacy early.
Yeah, and certainly this war is one of the worst things happening in the world, not just for the people who are there, but for the implications of everyone in the world. Right. That alone was a big item for me. But so we've talked about the neoconservatives, their downfall, how sweet it is. I mean, I will say, you know, you talked earlier about kicking them while they're down. I remember, and I want to be clear, right? We're talking about the people in power, the establishment power brokers, neoconservatives. And I remember when they kicked us when we were down. I remember them kicking the main delegates out of the national convention in 2012. And so, yeah, I hope that we all learn a valuable lesson. The party learns a valuable lesson, and we do not let them run this party ever again.
Recent example of that for all these idiots who are like, well, I don't like Liz Cheney, but she's standing up for democracy. She loves democracy. And when Thomas Massey said, hey, this emergency COVID spending, where's it all going? I'm going to hold this up. You're going to be a roll call vote on this emergency COVID spending. Donald Trump and everybody. Donald Trump wanted to kick Thomas Massie out of the Republican Party. What's the first thing democracy-loving Liz Cheney did? She endorsed his primary opponent, sent him money. He was a white nationalist. She hadn't thought about that, didn't care. She just knew that this libertarian, this anti-war libertarian, Thomas Massie, she had an opportunity to be on the side of Trump and kick his ass out of office.
Yeah.
That's their primary goal. It's a pro-war move.
Yeah.
Use Trump to do it or be against Trump to do it.
Right.
She does not care. That's how neocons operate. That's why they take them when they're down. They don't care. No shame.
There were many legitimate reasons to not like Donald Trump, but we need to always remind people that the reason Liz Cheney did not like Donald Trump is not the reason you did not like Donald Trump. Right.
If he was a neocon, she would have been down there with the QAnon shaman on J6 going, hell yeah.
Yeah.
That's not hyperbole.
So anyway, so ding dong, the witch is dead. Let me ask you, let's see, where next? You came out to Pork Fest this past year. I know there's big hope that we may, if Trump follows through and Ross Ulbricht is freed, that I know that the Free State movement and support at Pork Fest was some of the earliest adopters of the Free Ross movement and making this here. So I hope that Ross Ulbricht will be joining us at Pork Fest as a free man this next year. Are we gonna get you back at Pork Fest, Jack?
If you invite me, I'll be there. It was my first Pork Fest this last time, and I absolutely loved it. And I was embarrassed that I hadn't been there earlier.
Well, you are absolutely invited. I know on last week's show, I had Andrew Heaton on and invited him. Have you ever met Andrew Heaton?
I think so.
Well, anyway, he's excited too. I think we're gonna get some really some great people from around the national liberty movement coming out for this. Let me ask you. I feel like I'm shifting around topics quite a bit, but there's so much to think about after yesterday. So this new coalition in the Republican Party. I mean, well, first of all, it's interesting, right? You have the Libertarians, you have the America First conservatives. This coalition has managed to bring in, break. You're looking at kind of the voting demographics along racial lines, for example. It turns out that just running the first, woman African American / half Indian American candidate with nothing to say about anything. It turns out that wasn't actually a successful strategy to lock down the votes of Hispanic individuals. Hispanic men went majority for Donald Trump. African American men, 20% went for Donald Trump, which is historically high for African American men.
This is a working class multiracial coalition that helped Trump cross the finish line, that delivered the Senate to Republicans, that the Republicans will have the House. And it's the kind of diverse voting base that Democrats imagine they represent, and they don't really anymore. Trump's biggest problem was white voters. He had lots of them, but it was down according to some of the polling. After he lost in 2020, and the sort of the national conservatism conversation was a big thing. How do we use the state for right-wing ends? We'll have industrial policy. A lot of that stuff has kind of died down, other than the tariff talk, which I think Trump is serious about. It could be very bad unless he got rid of the IRS or something. That's another conversation. You don't hear, and J.D. Vance is very much a national conservatism, one of these big government, NatCon types. There's more libertarian stuff going on than that. And it's being supported, like you said, by Latino men and more black men and the black vote overall. And this coalition that I had hoped for after the 2020 election when Biden won. I'm like, you got this MAGA thing is not going anywhere. What can we do with this? And what I argued for, I wrote a 3,000-word piece for the American Conservative about this. I just shared it again today. A lot of what I talked about happened last night. And it's great. We need to capitalize on all of this.
Do you think that this coalition can last?
I don't know. I think all coalitions never last forever. But if it can last long enough to do some good, there was a Reagan coalition that lasted for a time, and I did some good things. There was an Obama coalition that lasted for a while, and I think did some good things. to a smaller degree and scale, there's been a Ron Paul coalition that came out of his movement that still exists. I think what you're doing up there with Pork Fest and, all that is part of it. Certainly what I've been doing. We're part of the mix now with what happened with this election, but we exist. We existed before, and we can be a part of it, and we can get things done. The LP's always existed. They're doing some different things now, I think, hopefully to great effect.
It seems to me that, looking back at the last 12 years and looking where the Republican Party is today versus 12 years ago, it seems to me that the Ron Paul message is now just like a part of the DNA of the Republican Party. Not to say that it's a fusion of many different things. It's not like a pure libertarian party. Some people might get on my case when I say that, but like you look at like JD Vance coming out and saying I'm not a Ron Paul guy, but the stuff he's saying about the Federal Reserve, I'm coming around to and realizing there's maybe we don't need this central bank. Maybe this is just causing more mischief than doing good for the American people. The turning of the page on the neoconservative foreign policies and towards a more, if not an outright non-interventionist foreign policy, at least one that is more skeptical of foreign warfare. And I feel like I see Ron Paul's fingerprints everywhere.
Absolutely, and especially on the Republican Party. When Ron ran, especially in 2008, and I didn't work for his campaign. People thought I did because I was on the radio and talking about him all the time, but I didn't. I would say to Republican voters, like, this is my guy. This is the real conservative. Screw Marco Rubio and the other idiots who are running. I don't feel like remembering their names right now. And they would say, like, well, Ron Paul's with the terrorists. Ron Paul's with the enemies. And you're anti-war, you're liberal, and you're now those same people like, I'm America first. I don't want to be involved in all these things. And it's the Democrats saying, you're with Putin. I'm like, you're a neocon from 15 years ago making the same argument, and they don't see it. And I laugh at it. I'm like,
Jack, you used to be with Saddam Hussein, and now you're with Vladimir Putin.
Right.
Why do you love all these tyrants so much?
Right, but the average Republican voter that likes Trump and voted for Trump is sounding more like Ron Paul.
Yeah,
I'll take
it. I very much believe we have to compare. We have to look at things where they are today compared to where they were yesterday, not where we not necessarily judge everything against the perfect ideal that we have in our mind. And certainly, it feels night and day where the Republican Party is. And I know the tariffs. I know certain economic policies that are kind of, have not been improvements from a libertarian perspective, but war is the health of the state. And if we can get in a better place on war, I think it's the worst thing that our government does is the mass slaughter of millions of people, considering how many have died between the wars in the Middle East and how many have died in Ukraine completely, unnecessarily. Anyway, I hope that we're turning the page. Jack, we are coming up. We're coming up towards the end. Any kind of final words? Any final thoughts? What does this all mean? What should we look at going forward, and where can people learn more about you and what you're doing?
I'm at basedpolitics.com. That's based-politics.com. It'll take you to our Substack. You can find all sorts of wonderful things. I'm at Jack Hunter 74 on X, Jack W. Hunter 74 on TikTok and Facebook. And I would just say this is a libertarian podcast directed at libertarians. Whether you like a lot of this embracement of Trump and MAGA and America First, however you want to look at it, and there's a lot of it I don't like. I didn't vote for the guy twice for many reasons that I'm not going to get into at the end of the show. There are so many things to latch onto that are good from a libertarian perspective. Care about those things, hope those things happen, and don't wish for them not to happen just to spite how you feel about this dude. I think that's ass backwards. We're supposed to care. People quit talking to family members and stuff over politics. We're supposed to care about any of this stuff because at the end of the day, I think that my philosophy is best for me and the people I love. So as libertarians, we think libertarianism is the best for us and the people we love. If you don't want the libertarian things to happen and you've stopped talking to your dad or your son or your brother or your best friend because you don't like Trump, you got it all wrong. So put away the hate and hope that good liberty things happen that are positive.
And no matter if you voted for them or not, hold the politicians accountable.
Yes.
Trump is going to be in a big position of power, and it's our responsibility to hold him to his promises and not just be on the Trump train because he's our guy. Because I mean, really, I don't know. I don't think anyone in power at that level is ever our guy. Maybe Ron Paul ever got elected there.
My guys, Ron Paul and Rand Paul, those are my guys. This is a guy who might do some of those things. So cool.
Yeah. Well, Jack, I really appreciate it. And I think it was Edward Snowden who said this past year at the Bitcoin conference, he said, if you give a candidate your vote, if you think that person is the best person who's going to advance, I'm paraphrasing him here, but if you think it's the practical choice that you need. He certainly was talking about Donald Trump because a lot of people at the Bitcoin conference where Trump was positioning himself as the pro-crypto candidate, pro-Bitcoin, and I hope we see good things there. He said, you can give a candidate your vote, but don't give them your soul.
Yeah,
and that's good advice for us, So we the work is not done. We've got plenty of work ahead. Jack, it's a real pleasure. Always pleasure to talk with you. Thank you for all the work you've done advancing the freedom message over the last, I don't know, what has it been, 20 years or so?
85 years I've been at
it. You're looking pretty good for 95, Jack.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Well, you keep all the good work with the Free State Project and all the things you do, and it's always good to talk to you, my friend.
All right. We'll look forward to having you back at PorcFest.
Thank you. I can't wait.
All right, everyone. That's the show. Thank you so much for joining us. I do want to mention again, as I mentioned last week, we are now in fundraising season for nonprofits like your friends at the 501c3 nonprofit organization, the Free State Project. And we have some new initiatives and some projects that we are developing for the new year, including enhancements to our recruiting efforts, our community building, and content creation of shows like these coming from the Free State Project. And right now we have a goal of raising $180,000 by the end of the year, by December 31st. The good news is one major donor, actually a new mover to the state of New Hampshire, has pledged $90,000 in matching funds. That means he will match dollar for dollar every single donation that comes in, up to $90,000 before December 31st. So I want to ask you, I haven't been asking for money in any of these episodes until this period of time. But if you have thought about contributing to support the Free State Project, now is the best time to do it because every dollar you donate is going to be worth $2. So if you donate $5, that means the Free State Project is going to get $10. If you donate $25, that's worth $50. If you donate $100, that's worth $200, and so on and so forth. We got a lot of great work we want to continue doing. There's so many folks out there in the broad liberty diaspora around this country who don't even know about the Free State Project yet. And it's our job to get the message out to them, to reach them any way we can and spread the message and let them know that we are building a liberty homeland in New Hampshire, and all who yearn to breathe free are welcome to join us. So we're going to be recruiting. We're going to be developing our communities. We're going to be developing great liberty content right here at the Free State Project, and your donation at fsp.org/give would make a big difference right now. So thank you in advance for your support and all the support you've been giving us all the way along. I also, of course, want to mention that we have in the Free State community events that are going on almost every single day in different regions of the state, and you can find those events at fsp.org. Check out our community calendar and come out to some Free State events. We'd love to see you there. And thank you, as always, to our podcast producer, Renita, for all the work she does to make this a wonderful show. And furthermore, as I said in my sign-off of my resignation letter that I gave to the Maine Senate yesterday, furthermore, my opinion is the Federal Reserve should be destroyed.